want to start today with a quick warm-up exercise. And I know as a warm-up exercise, we've been doing some of these circles and the ovals. Just a few pointers. Make sure our grip, we're still practicing, polishing, refining, sharpening our skill with this grip. And as we were talking a little bit earlier, it's this grip that allows you to do under overhand as long as you have this range of motion and you can get a little better sense of quality of line. Today we are going to put it to the test. So the first exercise we're going to do is it's a little bit of a revisit to what we saw last week. And I don't want you to think of this as, oh boy, we're just going right at it with a serious drawing. No, I want you to feel, and this is going to be about 5 minutes. Maybe we'll push it to 10. So it's a quick sketch. So I'm using my HB pencil. You should be using an HB or a 2B. What do I want you to do here? What I want you to get, also, once again, a sense of your grip. Now we have a reference. We're actually looking at the eyes that are on the screen, and I have to look at my paper. So one of the mistakes we usually make is when we're drawing, we fix our eyes on our paper and we stop looking at our subject, at our reference. So what happens? We end up drawing, you remember these? Our eyes end up looking like what we've been doing our whole life, the symbol of it. So in a way, we just make up the information that we already know. So we say, yep, that'll do it. But the refinement of it, I'm going to grab a pencil that's just a little bit darker so you guys could see a little bit better. So I'm going to go with the 3B. Make sure it's sharp. So how do I do that? Now, one of the ways would be if you guys could see my eyes are not on the paper. They're on the reference, which is a little bit it's on my screen actually. So it's a little to my right, and it's a little bit higher actually than the paper. So one way would be to free yourself and actually never look at the paper. That's one way, and that's called blind contour drawing. And you begin to get a sense of the line. So what do I want to see here? I want to just draw the major lines that I see. Now, when I say blind drawing, it means you never look at the paper. Here, I just peeked to place my pencil where I think it should go, but then my eyes are right back to my subject, and I get a sense of it. Now, this takes practice. Ideally, what I would want you to do today is to catch yourself looking at the subject 90% of the time and at your paper 10%. If you could do less than that, that'd be great. So when you're drawing, when you're looking at your paper, 90, I'm sorry, less than 10% would be ideal. So 90 to 95% of the time, with your eyes on your subject, you are going to begin to see better. And when we talk about drawing, we want to draw what we see. Now, if you're drawing from memory or imagination, well, yeah, perfect. You don't have to keep your eyes on the reference. Um, Here, you actually want to get a sense of the thickness of the eyelid, the curvature, where it grows a little bit rounder. Notice that I just did very simple lines, and I'm getting a sense of that shape. I want to see where it begins, and I'm talking about the iris now, and how much of it is right underneath. We see it again, the thickness of the upper eyelid, and how close it gets to the bottom eyelid. Getting a good sense of it. So my eyes back and forth when it's on the paper, not to get fixated, back on the subject, and confirm. That is what we want to, you know what, let me zoom in just a little bit more so you guys can see it a little bit better. Move this way. There we go. And at some point, I want to refine some of these elements, like the pupil. And I want to make sure I leave that little bit of white. preserve it so I could just come around it and add what would be one of the darkest elements in this drawing. And it already gets us pretty close. Now, one of the things we're going to try to do today is begin to, with the same grip, refine some of this rendering. So this is what stage 2 of your drawing is going to require for you to begin to add form and shape to the lines. So we are dealing with light now. Now, one of the greatest tips that I could ever give you is squint. Like literally put your eyelashes together, squinting right through your eyelashes. And notice how everything becomes kind of a blur. All you see are the big major lines, shapes, but the most important thing, you see what's light and what's dark. And you want to focus on what is darker and what is the darkest. So immediately I see how some of these areas are darker. And I can remember just by staying in a quick sketch mode, apply a little bit of, and remember you can, if you have a variety of pencils, this is one moment where you might want to switch to a softer, darker pencil. You're also applying basic, simple shapes of light and dark. We're not adding any type of detail. And when I mean detail, those, eyelashes and smaller, refined lines, if we keep it at major major lines, structural information, and stage 1 of rendering, which would be right about here, you should be happy. And this only took us 5 minutes. Now, if I wanted to take it a little bit further, yeah, you would actually begin. And then that's when we begin keeping our eye on the paper and getting really just kind of obsessed, stuck with um, our own idea of how it's supposed to look and taking our eyes off of the subject, which is, again, I think probably the biggest mistake because then we're just making it up. So it takes a lot of really observation, and it is probably the greatest skill that you can develop, how to see better and what is the most essential, what are the most important things that you need to see. So developing that skill takes exercises like this. And remember, we're dealing with something it's considered complex, the eye. There we go. So we're going to treat this as a warm-up exercise. We are going to move to the next one because we missed a couple minutes early. So the next one was going to be a profile one. And you know what? I'm going to challenge you guys because you guys are hard workers. You've been here already for a couple of weeks. Let's try to do this one in 3 minutes. And I have these clocks here. You can actually see them. Not to stress you out, just to keep you in kind of a sketching mode. So if you see me here, I my eyes are on the subject and now I'm looking at what are squinting through my eyelashes pretty much. I get the side of the angle. We remember the structure. We want to kind of pay attention to how it works. We know how this eyelid has that thickness we talked about, which is what gives it that realism, that likeness, how it wraps around what I know is a ball, the eyeball, and I am seeing it here. So the knowledge of what we looked at the past couple weeks, plus my observation skills to look at the details, angles, length of some of the lines that I need to develop here are pretty much everything we need for all of this to begin to come together. But I want you to consider this as a sketch. So it should be very loose. If you're already judging it, that's breaking one of the rules. Rule number 3, which is don't judge your work. Right now, you're just warming up. This is just a quick sketch. Yes, we want everything to be perfect and beautiful, but right now, we're just warming up our grip. We're testing our paper, pencil, range of motion, movement, and we're really just beginning to get ready to draw. So our observation, the things, our mental, um, what would you say? Um, I could say it no better than a warm up. I'm squinting to get a sense again of the lights and darks. I'm using more the side of my pencil with a very, very soft pressure. And now here, as I see the light right above the eyelid and a little bit of the shadow right underneath, you see how it starts coming together. But again, really loose sketches. The main goal here is to begin to identify and see the major lines, the structure that you're looking for, light and dark, and avoid details all the way till the end. There we go. Oh, and guess what? That was 3 minutes. So that's a good challenge. And we do this a lot in my classes. We do a lot of 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute, and then we push it up to 5 minute, 10 minute. All of a sudden, when you get 15, 20 minutes, you feel like it's too long. But these sketches, just once in a while to test yourself, a quick 1 minute sketch, and you're going to you're going to be forced. If you only had 1 minute, you'll be forced to really identify angles, lines, and the most important things, information that you can then take from there and then develop a little bit further with more time. So anything like this would totally be appropriate. Perfect, matter of fact. So quick sketches, don't be afraid of them. It's a great way um, to work yourself towards that likeness. Okay, we're going to do one more, and it's a mouth. Very simple. Again, we're dealing with a couple of lines, and we remember from last week, we have the corners of the mouth, and I'm going to get just a sense. How do I do this? Squinting. I am squinting. I do see a little bit of curvature, and I'm just going, because we're not drawing the entire face, I'm just going to go with a quick angle of a line. I know the mouth is not like this, and it's not like this. It's right about here. But there are a little bit of curvatures as it wraps a little bit towards the side. Once I have that, what are the next things that I can look for? I want to look at the structure again, the volumes underneath, the muscle or bone. In this case, we remember in the case of this girl, which is what I've been saying all along, it's not just lips, it's these lips have a peculiar shape. Although they do follow somewhat the same formula, you want to begin to identify, do you remember the 3 at the top? So you're looking at the roundness or the thickness, and then the 2 at the bottom. And these, I could see that they come a little bit rounder right towards the middle, making them a little bit fuller. And you could even see it here with the shadow that forms underneath, that they're coming out towards us, hiding a little bit of the light under here. So right there, we start with this structure. And now I'm going to begin to apply, once again, a little bit of soft rendering, paying attention now again to a little bit of the light and shadow, very soft pencil marks, rendering. And I do have, let me see if I could show you this because I had it ready for today. I want to see if this looks good because I want you guys to see if this might give you a better look at what I'm doing here. And it actually looks okay. So I want you to see, in terms of pressure here, how the pencil just rubbing some of this graphite on the texture of your paper. Once again, my focus here is how these shapes are relating to each other. But very simple solutions. I'm looking for what's darkest, what's lightest, preserving the light, and beginning to make, just like we did with our circles and eggs, more committed, more refined drawing lines. Although we're still sketching all the way through, you want to feel like very loose. Don't get tight with the lines that you're trying to put down. Keep them sketchy. By sketchy, I mean you can go over and over, but little by little, they're more defined, more committed, and little by little, darker. So now I'm going to go to, I'm doing a couple of lines shaping the lips. So they're, if you could see that, they're kind of curved. I'm using a little bit of the side of the pencil, and I feel like I could totally control how dark or how light. Some areas might be darker, so I could apply a little longer or a little bit more pressure. And as I move along, I see the dark here, and I begin to get a good sense of how this works, how light and where it's coming from. And in order for me to portray it, to show it to other people, look, hey, look at my lips, and look where the light was coming from. You need to understand it in order for them to be able to see it. There we go. Feel confident with my upper lip here. And now, really paying attention. Again, your eyes should be on your subject 90 to 95% of the time. You have to. You have to really observe, examine, find out what are the things. And I'm curving these lines, making them way smaller and way lighter. Way lighter. And I'm adding just a little bit lighter curved lines at the top. And this little touch here might make these floating lips actually maybe belong to a face here. So again, with that sketchy mode, add a little bit of skin. And all of a sudden, it starts coming together. There we go. And we can get caught up. Let me switch back. So you can see, there we are. And our lips come together. And that should make us happy. Perfect. Okay, so we are going to move to exercise number 1. Oh, perfect. Perfect timing. And I had one more mouth. And I guess I could, again, you can Google, have someone post for you if they have the patience. That would be the best way. But if you can look at online, a couple of references, eyes, mouths, just draw as many as you can. The better the photo reference, the better you have, better chance of you figuring out what type of lines you need to develop. But it is a great practice. If I were to give you homework, do 10 eyes and 10 mouths. Just fill up a page with eyes and mouths, and that's also going to be forcing you to develop how you handle rendering, lights, and shadows. Okay, our first exercise of today is going to be, we're going to look at the nose and the structure of the nose. I'm going to move this over here. So first thing we need to remember, I'm going to just place this over here. Perfect. Um, we haven't actually touched on this, so let's see. There we are. If you recall the planes of the face, when we look at a nose, and let's see if you guys can spot where I am on the page right now. I think some of you already got it. What is the first thing we need to see? The first thing we need to see is the basic, most absolute basic shape that we are dealing with, which in this case would be something like this. This already tells my mind, oh, it's kind of looking like a robot nose, like a robotic. Of course, it's the cubic um, sense where this would place me over here, and there's an eye, there's the other, and there's the other eye, and there's the mouth. So once we have something like this, a basic structure, I don't want to call it a cube, but it is cubic, I could even begin to deal with the light. And that's going to create even more of an illusion of what we're dealing with. And if I understand where that light is coming from, then everything begins to come together. So this would be step number one. No matter where you're looking at, visualize it like this. Now, whatever happens with the individual structures of the nose, this is a great page because it breaks it down right at the bottom with the profile. It shows us one of the basic lines here, the angle, and we talked about this last week, um, especially for the lips, profile lips, where you want to begin to realize, is the angle of my nose this much or this much? And we need to see the difference. We need to understand too, um, from step number one, if I were dealing with these lines, these type of angles, what kind of nose do I get here and here? And I hope you can already see the difference. Sometimes the difference between these angles is so small, so minimal. Uh, it is where those mistakes happen. Just a couple of degrees throws everything off, especially with the face. So being aware of what kind of angle I'm dealing with, let me just erase here a little bit, is gonna set us up for success. So as we're doing with the image at the bottom on stage number one, it kind of gives you a hint at just basic lines. From lines, we move to stage number two. And yes, there's a couple of little lines here, and you notice them. We are going to go over them. And again, I'm back to stage number one. And we're looking at the four images at the bottom of the image that I have on screen. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's step 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm still at step 1, but notice what happens at step 2. Step 2 is where this artist, and this is from a great book. I usually use, and I'll give you guys the reference as well. Um, for drawing anatomy, most of these books in the 40s and 50s came up with these great formulas, and they're still used today, is how to see the structure, and by structure, the basic structure, which always refers you to a cube, a sphere, or a cylinder. And if you can see a sphere, a cylinder, or a cube in the shape that you're trying to develop, then you want to make that your starting point. And then from there, all they did here was render. So once you begin to add a little bit of light and you add it in the correct manner, meaning we are reading it properly, where it doesn't get darker than it's supposed to be in areas, or it doesn't get lighter than it's supposed to be in areas, and it doesn't compete, all of a sudden you begin to, and it's like magic. All of a sudden, I had one line, if you remember. It started with one line. That would be my step number one, which is not in this step 1, 2, 3, 4. But yeah, I would say starts with here, step number one. And by there is adding a little bit of that structure, but this most important part, adding the volume. So referring back to this, okay? So I wanted to show you a couple more, um, which are this one. And it kind of takes us back to that first week where we did the skull and trying to remember everything that's happening underneath, um, so we can have a better. I'm going to move to a next page. Here we are. So we can understand what's happening with the structure, with the nose. And this is a great image. And here I use this one so you can actually see how the nose relates to the ocular cavity. So you kind of see a little ghostly image back there of how this falls into place. And then we have nasal bone. And I want you to pay attention to this one here. You have cartilage. And this image is great because it has the division here at the front, which it's almost heart shaped, but it has a front and a bottom. So once, oh, sorry, I'm a little bit off here. So there we go. So this is really understanding the basic of the structure, but I like this image a little bit better because it breaks it down. It shows you with a little more realism. Now it is taking this a little bit further, and the idea here is to see how this, which gives you kind of the center line of the nose, and it's divided completely symmetrical, is going to be how you can create the structure and the sides with the proper shapes for each individual nose that you will ever draw. And how far you could take this once you really understand these basic steps. A little bit more here. And before I even add any type of rendering, any light, you already can see not just the volume and the size, the peculiarities of an individual's nose. And it all comes down to how you add your lights and shadows. So this is a great image to kind of dissect or deconstruct and really understand that basic structure that is going to help you piece it back together, just like a puzzle. Um, so now we're going to move to a longer exercise, which is going to be this one. And I am going to have you take out your, hopefully a bit, larger size format paper, 8 by 10 or sharpening my pencil a little bit. So I am working on 11 by 14, but I am going to make it as big as I can. I don't want to make it tiny. So I don't want you to be working on, see the size of my hand? I don't want you to work on the nose, and make it about this big. I want you to work about this big. So fill up the page is what I'm trying to say. Trying to get comfortable. Sometimes the size that we work with makes us uncomfortable, so we tend to either work too little or always medium and push yourself to maybe a little too large. If it's comfortable with large, then you should maybe try medium or small. Those are very few people that love to work large. So I ask you just try to fill up the page, and we're going to try to follow these steps, which are usually one of the troubleshoot um, for nose when you have a frontal view. But this should break it down, make it easy for us. And we did this kind of before. So we started with, I'm going to start with my line here, which would kind of set my keystone. By keystone, I mean where that little ridge above the nose meets the forehead and has always hints for what type of light we're dealing with. From there, I'm just going to get a little bit of angle. So here's how big, I decide how big my nose is going to be. Well, I actually set it up with that keystone a little bit. And I'm just making, kind of looks like a tie. That's just straightening out here at the bottom. Now it is, I'm noticing that the width down here might be a little bit wider than, so I want to pay attention. If I were to draw a straight line from this edge of my keystone to my nose, it should kind of line up. Actually, it could be a little bit narrower than that. From there, we have the bottom of our keystone here, and right next to it, just a little bit underneath, we have an angle, which gives us that dimension, three-dimensional side view. And from there, we are going to add the bottom. If this were a three-dimensional shape, we're going to add the bottom side of it, which just by adding a couple of angles, shorter lines, should begin to give us a sense. And it's mostly capturing the right angle. These angles could just, as I said, by shifting just a couple degrees is what begins to throw everything off. And our likeness, even we go, oh, why doesn't that look right? It most likely you missed an angle or you missed a proportion, meaning it looks a little bit bigger than it should have been. The angle could be right, but the proportion could be off. So it's one of those things, usually, could be one or two. Here we are. Now I'm going to connect very lightly the sides. So here we're doing in our sketching, and we've done this many times before. I always recommend we're doing very light lines because as we develop these lines, they're getting more firmer, more confident, more defined, and darker. So we're starting very, very light, and we're going to work our way up to darker. So I finished just now, stage one, which is at your top left. I'm going to top center, which we begin to deal with structure. So now I begin to see somewhat the ridge of the ocular, so what we will call the eyebrow. And they're very lightly just hinted in there to give me a sense of where this eyelid and the skin for the eye would be, and how this ridge, which would be my tear duct, would connect as I bring in the shapes of the eyes later on. Notice that this, and we're talking about the cartilage of the nose, and in this case it would be stage one, and I'm talking about how we saw it here. You're dealing with bone, cartilage, cartilage. So the shape of it, notice we're back here, that you see a couple of shifting lines. You want to develop the way they're doing here in stage two, some of those curvatures, some of the length, always remembering that it's symmetrical. And I'm adding a little bit of that center ghost line here just to show you that. But this is really important here. And then we're going to deal with the one at the bottom. So as I begin to round some of these shapes and begin to give it a little more likeness, I want to make sure I pay attention now to proportion as well. How big should this be? So this line that goes out here, how does it relate to this up here? If I were to draw a straight line, meaning is it out to here wide or is it too close here? No, it should line up just like it does on our reference if we were to place a ruler right where we want it. Now, the length of this line, as I reach what would be the top of this line, Does it go up to here? Does it go here? So you get a good sense and you begin to develop this proportion. So notice that this, as it matches, and I'm talking about this ridge where this cartilage connects with this one. Just below that, right about here, is where this turns upwards. So I want to have a sense of those relationships. And that's what's going to give you even more confidence with these types of drawings. Now I have a little bit of roundness into this cartilage and a little bit of curvature here. Rounding of the front of the nose. And again, we dealt with those cartilage in this previous exercise. If you need to see them like this, that heart shape that bends underneath, we need to develop them here and see them a little bit better as they round, as they go underneath. But this is a great guide in order to see the step-by-step how this connects with our nasal cavity here, our nostril. And on this side, how it just rolls in, always curving. And how far, how wide, and just a little bit dark. There we go. Rounding out the other side. It should match, very symmetrical. Right into this area here, matching the other side. I think I'm missing just one line here, which is relevant, and you'll see why. Usually it catches the light, and it goes right underneath the lower part of the eye, right into the cheekbone. So that's perfect. And one more thing. You see these added lines down here, just very straight, kind of geometric, looks like almost like a little map of something. That will be the shadow, and that's going to be very important. A cast shadow, meaning the light is coming from above. So that's a good hint. Perfect. All right. So if we're here, we should be absolutely confident before we start drawing. And by drawing, I mean we're going to start adding light, shadow, rendering. We should be extremely confident before moving past here that we are where we want to be. So these are the steps, and we're still sketching. Once we get past here, if you begin doing that time-consuming development of light and shadow, and we still have to, oh no, wait, I have to move this. This was longer. Fix things. You did it out of order, out of steps. Here is where you still, okay, does it look good? Do I need to rearrange anything? Is everything right angles? Is it the proper proportions? I need to see it before I move forward. I look at mine and I say, yeah, I'm pretty happy. I think I'm ready to render. There's very minimal adjustments that I might have to make. Maybe up here I see one where it might be wider, but I could do that in rendering. So I'm going to start rendering. And the way I do this is, once again, with my grip, I'm going to just begin to look at squinting, begin to add graphite to my paper. And I'm just going back and forth, minimal pressure, really having a good sense of how much pressure I want to add to this entire area. And I could actually go all the way through here. Now, one thing you want to start developing as well is when you add this type of rendering, your light and shadow, sometimes, most of the time, if you can, depending on which stage you're developing this, you want to follow the direction of the form as well. So I know this skin that I'm trying to create an illusion of wraps around in this direction. I don't want to shade it like this. I want to shade it like this. And I take a little time and patience to kind of give it that sense of wrapping, curving, and coming in and down. Now, I did some of my lines a little too dark. That was so you guys could see them. So some of these lines, my nose here is going to look like it's from a very angry guy, because that line is going to be tough to fix. So yeah, you have some light lines that you slowly develop into darker and darker. Here I see a little bit of what seems to be eyebrow, a little bit darker shade of value. So I'm going to add it. That's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about how this nose is going to develop. So from here, I'm going to go right into the side. And because we are dealing with a nose that is lit from above, so you're outside and it's noon, basically. And that's the kind of lighting we're going to see. And here's that line I mentioned earlier, how it's relevant, because it catches the light here and then it goes this way. But remember, you're still maintaining a sensation of sketching. You're still at a stage where we're building, sculpting, developing. I'm going to go down at the bottom where most of the lighting is now being developed here. And I'm just going to fill it in. And again, I'm paying attention to my grip, my technique, my pressure, the kind of strokes that I'm making. You could be following the form of this shadow as it falls on the lower side of the upper lip. I begin to add a little more darkness here where I see it. And as it wraps around the nostril here, and adding a little bit of lighter. So I'm starting to have a sense of what's going to be lighter, what's going to be darker, what's going to be darkest. And I add all of these. Notice how this one's a little bit lighter than the one right just below. And I know we will come back to give it another layer. But already you can see where you're going. You can begin to see where you're headed, how you're getting there. Any corrections you need to make it should be done in this stage. From here, you should feel like you're just refining. There's a little bit, notice it right here at this side, very shallow. And these are the small little details that make your nose good to great. It's catching those light and shadows in the right shape, because it's just a shape, really. And notice I'm just filling up a shape as I see it, and I'm still on stage number 3. I'm working a little bit slower than I usually do, so hopefully you guys are following along. If you're ahead of me, great. Just follow the steps on screen. If you have any questions, then you can ask, or just wait. I'll be right there, because we are going to finish this one very soon, it seems like. So there we are. We're beginning to create that illusion, and see when it happens. I know you guys understand this already, but when we create shapes of light and shadow, our brain cannot help it solve the puzzle. And our brain, like I said, it's so powerful. It goes beyond the puzzle. Oh my God, this looks like so-and-so's nose. It's not just a nose. It begins to look like a nose that you are very familiar with. But again, it goes right back to lines, shapes, angles, and now light and shadow. So I am moving now to stage number 4, which is the bottom left on your screen. I do want to notice that there's going to be a nice bright highlight right down the center and right to the left of it. So I want to make sure I preserve that, but I don't have to. I could erase it later on. So we are going to go maybe to a lighter pencil. I'm not going to do that, but this is where you want to get a sense of your technique, how you apply some of these lines, which should be almost overlapping each other. Because this is what makes, when you think about drawing, and again, there's so many variations. If you're looking for more expressive gestural, but if you want it photorealistic, these are the techniques that you really need to pay attention to, develop, which is how you apply your graphite to the paper in order to create the right values in the right place, in the right shape, to really convince us of that illusion of a three-dimensional nose on a piece of paper. And it could look so real, people will think it's a photograph. So if that's how far you want to take it, it will take developing this technique. Well, all of them so far, because you want it like, have a good structure, but from here on out is where you really need to be patient and be very observant. This is one of the most difficult stages, because for us to really see light, we see it all as, oh, if it's light or shadow. There's so many variations. Gradations. In all of these grays that, again, in a value scale of 10, there might be 6 or 7 here. And that's what you want to ideally end up with. And what do I mean by that? This is going to be my darkest area here. So that would be a 10. And this little highlight where there's no graphite, that I'm going to leave blank right there, that's going to be a 1. So from 1 to 10, you want to have a variation of at least 5 different grays. And I call them grays. It's actually variations of white to black. Um, your graphite, how light, how many passes. I'm getting a little carried away down here. I want to make sure I don't lose track of where I was. And again, yeah, see, you get carried away. You can lose your place for a second. And all of a sudden, major changes that sometimes becomes, oops, too late. You have to start over. I'm going to go to the other side, making sure we talked about this, how your grip allows you to create the type of line and the type of stroke that you need. And here I see it almost as a rounding, not a straight line like this, but almost a rounding. Let me switch over here so you guys can see it a little bit better. Hopefully. So here we are. Right there. So the line, it's not straight across. And I'm up here at the, where we would have the nasal bone meeting the cartilage. If you go straight over, you can actually curve that line, creating more of a sensation of the form. And you want to make sure you don't curve it too much. Otherwise, you have a big bump. But applying your lines in the direction of the form, meaning in this case, a curve, is really what helps you create that illusion even more. So there we are. Now you want to pay attention to not just the direction, but also the value. So I know this one's way lighter. And notice the lightness of the pressure. And it continues to round all the way to the front. I want to move this over here. So I'm here at the bottom now. Oops. Sorry. Right there. And continue rounding some of these lines. So here you're going to have variations of shape, which go to the side. So you want to do this direction. What's in the front? You want to go, again, that nice curve. And as it rounds to the bottom, then you shift the curvature downward like this. Perfect. So there we have it. Now, it is a lot of fun dealing with, remember, stage 1, bringing it to stage 2, all the way to stage 3, 4, 5. Notice as we get darker and darker, and as I add more graphite, and I'm going to rush this so we could finish up our last exercise. Notice that as soon as I begin to bring what I was talking about, variation in that value, more contrast, key word. But again, with the human face, we could have high contrast, meaning there's harsh light, but the variations in light from 1 millimeter to the next are so subtle. They can be so delicate. It takes this level of skill um, and practice for you to develop. And it could take, honestly, years of practice. Where you know what kind of likeness you're looking for. But before you know it, I think even after today, you will be very happy with hopefully seeing this a little bit simpler, that it is doable, that it could break down and simplify it into a subtle, very easy, not formula, but developing a technique. And here's that line. You become more and more familiar with portraiture. You will see how much easier and easier from the get-go you'll set yourself up in order to enjoy your art practice. And you'll discover so many more ways and more things. There's a little bit of reflected light. That's a fun thing to deal with. And just the study of light, that's a whole course in and of itself. I mean, it's probably the most important thing. How to deal with light. Whether you're dealing with color or not, light is really one of the major factors. And knowing not just how to see it, how to read it, but how to transfer it. It takes practicing your skill, practicing your stroke, practicing your observation. Okay, so I'm going to leave this one there. Perfect. And I had one more. And this one we are going to, Oops, sorry. Where are you, nose? Oh gosh. Give me 1 second. I need to import one quick image. This must have been last minute. There we are. Nope. Oh gosh, sorry. There it is. And it's going to be this one. Sorry about that. There we are. So this should take a little bit. This one's going to be a little bit faster. I just wanted to show you the differences. We had frontal view nose. This one we're going to work with kind of a similar system where we're going to start visualizing. And this is another way. That little bump, early bump that we saw, let's see right here. Again, make it larger, hopefully. So we have one. And here's where that circle practice comes in handy. Visualize it. And now number 2. So we start with 2. This is another way, another formula. If it works, then that's the one to go with. And notice that there's a little triangle. This is something you don't need to draw. You need to visualize it. But if you want to draw it, it's very helpful. This is the angle that I've been talking about. So this nose, I want to make sure I get that angle. And I'm pretty much seeing it already. And just to close it out, you can have it right there. But that would be step 2, actually. So I'm already at step 2, where you see that triangle. Most important one is this angle right here. The size of them, very important, yes. The relationship between the size and that angle, crucial. So from here, it just jumps over to shaping the front, that curvature that goes right underneath, and we're beginning to get very familiar with it, with the light, how light and shadow plays under there. I'm just going to draw a line, straight angle this way, and we're going to visualize once again this structure. Remember, the bone, cartilage in the front, but sideways. So here, I want to see it sideways and how it turns sideways, how it meets this bump here, which is the nasal bone, which is that small little bump or curvature you see in stage 3 here. And again, how subtle or prominent, that's what's going to give your portrait uniqueness, likeness. Because we all have it. Some of us a little more than others. Some of us, it would seem like they don't. But this crucial feature of the profile nose, obviously the curvature, roundness of it. And notice, with these simple lines here, I'm very close to stage, in this case, step number 4. Moving it over here, which for some reason it's just making sure this line, visualizing that this line and this line are on a vertical. And that's very key because it deals with the angle of the face as well. So if this was a little bit further in or further out, you're going to have the whole shift of your face a little bit off. Okay, so we are going to go to step number 5, which is the bottom left. And that would be adding some of these lines that wrap around the front and create the aperture, the nostril, and how it comes just inside this back circle here with the little cavity. And it's just a couple of simple lines. Now this is also all of them features that will give the characteristics, the likeness to your portrait. And then it wraps back, almost meets, and wraps back and around second circle here. Perfect. Now I want to see this wrapping into the upper lip here. Perfect. So this is in a way a little simpler approach. It could get very realistic. And now we're going to apply the same approach, which would be light. I squint and I see variations of it. Obviously, the darkest would be right in here with a little bit of variation towards the back. And as it comes to the front, it completely softens up and it rounds and it wraps right underneath, right into light right here. So I want to make sure these lights are nice and polished. And right underneath, we have to, again, go back to our file, our mental file. We know the structure. We know this is facing down. So the light should hit it here as it wraps upwards and towards the front, being aware of your knowledge of the structure. I'm just adding a nice, soft, even bit of graphite here, knowing that it doesn't get any lighter than that in certain areas, preserving some of these lights, but it doesn't get any dark. It could get darker as I come back and add a second layer. So here I'm just adding a very light value in order to figure out some of the variations with these very delicates, and you'll notice very delicate shifts right here, right back here, which is the key of the profile nose. Where is the front? Barely see it. As it wraps, how do we develop the side? So the side is going to catch, in this case, a little less light. And if you see it, I hope you do, it is a little bit darker. So I'm going to add just that little extra layer. And once again, we go to our keystone here. Note that again deals with the light differently. And again, we could see how this is going to begin to develop as we were to add the eye and the cheekbone and the mouth. It puts us in a pretty good position here. Very soft light shifts in these values, and that makes me happy. Now there is not much contrast. The direction of the lines here and there in order to give you a little bit of that sensation of what the shape is, what it's doing. And one of those good tips would be to revisit with an eraser and add just a little bit. I kind of left it, but you could draw some of the light just like I did there by coming right back and taking some of that graphite out. Just for fun, let me do one right here, right at the bottom. Might be too much, but that's how you would do it. And you could begin to see the transformation, how developing the quality of your lines. Yeah, my profile, I did them a little too dark. If I were to develop them lighter, little by little, from soft to darker and darker until I was refined and getting to the darkness that I needed, if I were able to develop it in that way, that is actually the way you're supposed to do it. Excellent. All right, we have one final one, which should be easy, and that is the ear. And there's really not much to it. I have one more sample here, which It deals with the profile and the direction. And I mentioned this before, how if you notice right in the middle of the image, there's a head from above. The view from it is from above. So we see how the ear sticks outwards in that angle. Now the image in the middle shows us that the ear in profile, the top of it lines up right with the lower eyebrow or just with the upper eyelid. And the lower part of the ear lines up with the bottom of the nose or somewhere in that range. The other thing is the angle of the ear. So I'm talking about this here. If I had my, and I'm going to do a quick egg shape here, 2 eggs actually for profile. So this is the front of my face. And as we have this, my ear, which would be here, what I want to figure out is the angle of it. It's not straight up, there's an angle to it. And the matching direction, the top of the ear lines up with eyebrow, top of the eyelid. That would be the top of my ear. And the bottom would be where my nose is with the bottom. And that gives me, ta-da, my ear. Now, the one thing we're going to focus on the most here today, actually, one last thing. The image in the middle to the right that shows us also from the frontal view. Let me move this a little bit this way. So we have this here, have my egg. How if you had a frontal view, the ear in the same angle has a bit of a side angle and it also sticks outwards. Now again, variations. Um, this is a general rule. It's a formula that gets you very close, but you have to, again, looking at your subject, use some of these to, in a way, figure it out and create that portrait likeness. We're going to do this quick exercise, um, our final exercise, looking at that little image at the top, which is this one here. And I'm just going to do this. So you have the general shape. And remember, I was just talking about the angle, how it goes forward like this, and then that would be the earlobe. So this would be my general shape for an ear. And now, when you come here at the bottom, how the thickness and the curvature that goes this way and upward with that line that comes right out of there. This would be the general structure that gets you there. And I'm kind of going back to here, what we did for the nose and what we did for the eye. In this case, the cartilage, the general shape, general structure that gets you structurally close to where you need to refer back to in order to develop it is this one here. Now from here, you would want to add this little dimple here that it is very correct, but there are very big differences from one, not big, but noticeable would be this one here. Obviously, how the earlobe connects or doesn't to the chin, but the general structure is always going to be somewhere right around here. And with that, I'll remind you this angle is going to be key. How you develop the ear in the proper angle according to the head, that's going to be the key. And I have this one, which is our last exercise of the day. And it should be very quick. So it's going to be in the other direction. And I'm going to use this side of the paper here, which at stage number 1, once again, I start with that basic shape. There's a little bit of curvature right to my earlobe. And once again, I would hope you guys do these as big as you can. Fill up the whole page. Make it at least half a page if you're working on a regular sketchbook. So you get to work some of those details in there. Now notice that some of the lines begin to show us, and I'm going to do this one here, how it wraps out and around, giving me that outer thickness. And again, these lines should be very light, to start off with. I want to look at the inner that connects. And here are some of those shapes that are going to basically be value changes, creating that form. Into the ear cavity and that little lobe I mentioned earlier. And how it connects, little dimple. And there you go. So figuring out these lines is going to be key. And why is that? The general shapes, the general curvature. From here on out, it's pretty much what we've been doing all day today, which would be figuring out the value changes, the light and shadow, which in this case are always going to pretty much be underneath, inside, always darker here, unless you have light hitting it directly. Even then, it's a cavity, so there will be major shifts in dark spots here. And being able to create, again, especially here, some of the direction of the line and how you apply them to create that shape and the roundness or convexity, meaning the undulation inward of it. So outward or inward. And you're going to deal with a lot of small curved lines. And when I say lines, your value, the pencil lines that you're applying, the direction of it. It shouldn't all be, they should not all be just straight back and forth, back and forth. I use a motion, and I want to show you that one up close, which is very helpful to me. And that would be this, a circular motion. So in certain areas where I'm suggesting not to do this, it would work. You can make it work. And I'm using very, very light values here. But when I have a curvature, something, a shape like this, I apply my pencil or my graphite in a circular motion. Bigger or smaller. But because you're working in somewhat of a 360 direction, you can actually modify and by adding more um, density in a certain area, you can really begin to manipulate the shape of it. So notice that this area I just did by circular pencil strokes. And as I work my way down, I want to show you from the upper view. You can begin to see that you can create roundness and that kind of variety of shape that we're looking for, which again, I'm going to try it over here. And I'm working with small circular or figure eights that get lighter or darker the longer I stay in one area. So denser means deeper. Smaller or bigger circles, lighter circles, it means more exposed to the light. And this you would use for more complex forms. You could use it for all of them, but then you could get away with regular, kind of a hatching motion. Down here, I would really suggest that technique, which would be the circular stroke again. And it's one that I really love, and I find myself using almost always when I want to create this kind of um, rendering, more realistic or we go. And yeah, it would really help to not just have a floating ear on paper. Adding the background and the shadows as it connects is what gives it a completely different dimension. Once you place it on the subject, voila.